On Sunday, Sunday we got through verse 12. We'll back up tonight. Start in verse 8 and read through just to kind of catch us up. Do a little review, and then we'll take off. Before we get started, Brother Brad's going to offer us up a prayer before we get started. Again, it is good to see everybody out tonight. We got a full house again tonight, so thankful for everybody's here, for another opportunity to be here midweek to forget about some of the the stresses and the burdens that we deal with day to day, and just be refreshed. But in James chapter 4, James chapter 4 and verse 8 beginning, James says, "Draw nigh to God, and He will draw nigh to you. Cleanse your hands, ye sinners, and purify your hearts, ye double-minded. Be afflicted and mourn and weep. Let your laughter be turned to mourning and your joy to heaviness. Humble yourselves in the sight of the Lord, and He will lift you up. Speak not evil one of another, brethren. He that speaketh evil of his brother and judges his brother speaks evil of the law and judges the law. But if they are a judge of the law, you're not a doer of the law, but a judge. There is one lawgiver who is able to save and able to destroy. Who art thou that judgest another?" Yeah. So James, he's kind of jumping off of this negative aspects that he's speaking to here. Some of the characteristics in the first part of chapter 4. How do we draw nigh to God? Or we submit in verse 8. Resist the devil, and he's going to flee. Then he says, do this. Draw closer to God. Cleanse your hands. Purify your hearts. Speaking to these double-minded. Be committed in what you're doing. Verse 9 and 10, if we humble ourselves, we're going to experience that godly sorrow that he speaks about there in verse 9. That's not a pretty picture, to be afflicted and mourn and weep. Let your laughter be turned to mourning and your joy to heaviness. But that's the example. That's what happens when you have a penitent heart. We understand the cost and the weight of sin, and it burdens us, and we understand, and we are turned to that sorrow. And then verse 11 says, don't talk about each other. Don't speak evil towards each other. Michael made a really good point. When we have an issue, we got to talk with somebody. Let's talk to them. Let's not talk about them. Get rid of all that evil speaking. We're not a judge. We saw passages. We spoke about different passages such as John chapter 12 and verse 48, that he that rejects me and receives not my words has the ones that judges him. Matthew chapter 10 and 28, Matthew chapter 25, 2 Corinthians chapter 5 and verse 10. All those verses that we talked about on Sunday, very specifically speaking about Christ as the one lawgiver that's able to save and able to destroy. And James says it's very plainly, in verse 12, there's one. And it's not you, brethren, it's not you. In verse 13, picking up, says, "Go to now." King James says, "Go to now." English Standard, "Come now." And the NIV, I really like that. It says, "Now listen, just listen." It says, "You that say, tomorrow or today or tomorrow we're going to go into such a city and continue there a year and buy and sell and get gain." So this chapter, or verse 13 through 15, kind of getting ahead of myself. I got a little excited on that part there. That listen now, just that real attention getter. If someone would read 13 through 15, whatever version you got, let's just read 13 through 15 together.
Spend a year there, buy and sell, and profit. Whereas you do not know what will and you ought to say, the Lord wills, we shall live and do this or that.
So, listen here. Now listen. Pay attention. Come now. James is introducing this new subject that no doubt needed addressing among those that were scattered abroad. Verse 13, kind of getting into this idea. James reasons, he's reasoning with the worldly, not just focusing on those worldly pleasures. Also would be those absorbed in the quest for gain or for advancement as we go into some of this context here. Some were confidently, and I think that's the key, confidently planning the future without considering the uncertainty of life. They failing to include God's will in their plans. And that's an applicable principle today. I mean, it's easily applied to all. Just some examples. Considering we got some of us in here before too long. We'll be dealing with those college days. Considering where we're going to go to college, or taking a job, or moving to another area. We might be considering the educational opportunity, how great the school is going to look on a resume or a sports program that they may have, the boost in salary from a new position, or the perks and the excitement of a new city. And James would say, your focus is on the wrong spot there. What about the neighborhood? What about the crime rate? What about the soundness of a local church? Is there an established church? How far is it from where your home is that you're going to be moving to? Are there elders? Or do they have children? How about Bible classes? What kind of work is the church involved in? Are they active? Individually, have I prayed for guidance? Have I asked more seasoned Christians about the area? Etc. Along that line. What's my focus? Is it me or is it spiritual? That's what James seems to be getting at here. Any thoughts? I'll stop there for a moment. Let you guys take off. Yeah. Just these these examples that I put there, the educational, the job, the school, whatever. I mean, that's a realistic deal, and I honestly, I don't think I really put a whole lot of thought into it when I first time I moved out, when going to school, going to college, or whatever. So, hopefully, a little bit of wisdom comes with time. Anything else that have children that have moved the house and you want to share? For Michael, he's closer to me. His son's closer to me, so we'll put it on him. Yes. So for the audience, I mean, nothing wrong with planning to travel, right? That's what they're planning to do. Plan on traveling. Nothing was wrong with seeking gain. Nothing wrong. The wrong was that they fixed a couple things: a definite time frame for what they said they would do, if they would remain in the city, and when they would leave, when they would buy, when they would sell, how they would make profit. The problem was without relying upon God and seeking His will first. That's the problem. What's the focus? Yeah, absolutely. Absolutely. Is that ever a problem for us? It's a problem for me. They seem to be promising themselves the continuance of their own life, accomplishing their desires, whatever the successes of their labors, without respect to God's providence, without respect to God's direction, as if their times and their works were in their hands and not His. And that seems to be the problem. If you would turn to Luke chapter 12. Jesus warns of the same attitude. In Luke chapter 12, if someone would read Luke chapter 12, verse 16 through 21.
the things you have prepared, whose will they be? So is the one who lays up treasure for himself and is not rich toward God.
If you compare that parable and just flip over to Luke chapter 18. Luke chapter 18, 10 through 14. Where we got these two guys praying. What's the main similarity? Yeah. I have these noted in both problems. They both have an eye problem, not the seeing problem, but the eye, personal. I, me, my. Absolute attention has been placed on self in the parable of the rich man's barns. I mean, absolute attention on himself. Just as those who James is speaking to. There's focus on me and what I want, when I want, how I want it, as long as I want to have it. Which sounds a lot like the American dream to me, right? I mean, we instill in our kids, society instills in society's children. You can have what you want, when you want it, as long as you're willing to buckle down and take it. And that's dangerous. That's dangerous. Anything to add to this point? All right, verse 14. Mm-hmm. You was teasing me, wasn't you? You was holding out.
Yeah, well,
Go ahead.
I always say it. Not just the certainty of, we often take this, I think, some certainty of going around tomorrow, flights of paper, but I guess from the perspective of what I think about, the certainty that their business plans are going to go as they intend is pretty comical. There's just the certainty that we have control over the things that happen, whatever we think is going to happen next year, that we will.
Yeah.
In that sentence is pretty condemning. Like as if they had it figured out.
Yeah. I mean, just work-related type stuff. I'm a planner now, preparedness, and you plan for the worst case, hope for the best, and maybe it falls somewhere in the middle, and nothing ever goes according to plans. You have a really good, defined, strong backbone of a plan as a principle, and you bounce all around that. But you still use that as a focus, right? I mean, that's the foundation, but it never ever goes as planned. Yeah, I was trying not to think about it, Jonathan. I went all day without hearing it.
But it's a perfect example of this concept. I mean, 3 years ago, how many things have changed since then because of something that none of us anticipated anybody had in their 3-year plan.
Yeah.
And now it's changed so many aspects of our lives, some temporarily and some permanently.
Yeah. That's a great point. I mean 3 years ago today, almost to the date, Jess and I were on our way back from anniversary trip. Pulled off the interstate into London, and my phone rang. It was my boss. I need you to report to here tomorrow. Didn't expect that. So, to your point, yeah, things change.
And it's just like Richard Wolf used that term, like you just stop dealing with uncertainty. If we remember that we're not in control.
Yeah.
And so if when we have a really hard time dealing with uncertainty, it's probably an indicator on our faith.
Yeah, that's a really good point. Really good point. In verse 14, whereas you know not what to be on the morrow, for what is your life? What is your life? What kind? What nature is it? What assurance can be had of the continuance of it? Right? We have absolutely no assurance that we'll make it home tonight. How do we express our life, or what may it be compared to? I mean, that's what he's talking about here in Psalms chapter 144. In Psalm chapter 144, Someone would read verses 3 and 4. 144, verse 3 and 4.
Jehovah, what is man that thou takest knowledge of it, or the son of man that thou makest account of it? Man is like the vanity, his days are as a shadow that passeth away.
Yeah, another version, man is like a vanity, man is like a breath. His days are passing like a shadow. We understand. We've heard this all of our lives, I'm sure. If you go out in a cold morning or a cold evening and you breathe and you see your breath, how long does it last? I mean, it doesn't. It's gone. It's gone. It's quickly gone. And James continues to compare life to a vapor. Your life is a vapor, meaning it's frail, it's uncertain, it's of short continuance. And Peter makes the same acknowledgement of the uncertainty of tomorrow in 2 Peter chapter 3. 2 Peter chapter 3 in verse 10. But the day of the Lord will come as a thief in the night, in which the heavens shall pass away with a great noise, and the elements shall melt with fervent heat. The earth also and the works that are therein shall be burned up. In an instant, in a moment unknown, things can be ended. And I'm certain maybe not all of us, I'm sure know of somebody that knows of somebody that would know of people who have been taken in an instant from this life, who we all thought were healthy and they would live a long life and they would make it to an old person, or perhaps we've been really in some close calls ourselves where we were almost taken. So I mean, we've been in instances like that before, I'm sure. Paul, as he writes to the Thessalonians, he makes the same statement. In 1 Thessalonians chapter 5. Someone would read 1 Thessalonians 5, 1 through 6, please.
Now is the time, ye ox, brethren, that you have no need of anything to be written to you, for you yourself know full well that the day of the Lord will come as in a thief in the night. While they are saying peace and safety, then destruction will come upon them suddenly, like labor pains upon a woman with child, and they will not escape. But you, brethren, are not in darkness, that the day would overtake you like a thief, for you are all sons of light and sons of day. We are not of night nor of darkness, so then let us not sleep as others do, but let us be alert and sober.
So verse 4, 5, and 6, I mean, that's what I really wanted to pull from that. A distinction. Should be a distinction. Paul reminds Christians to remember who you are. He says you're the light, and as such, we're called to be ready for that day, ready for that moment. He says we're not, not that you can stop it. I understand we can't stop it because we're not in control, and we understand that we're not in control. But to be ready and to be prepared, I mean, in this instance, for judgment. If we're taken from this life, then judgment awaits. But it is easy to get caught up. It is easy to be tempted by this worldly wisdom that we see in towards the end of James chapter 3. But anything else to add? Any other comments from the group on to that point? The idea of a vapor.
Well, I can't believe that nobody is immediately drawn to the fact that we should have a vape shop this day on 461.
All right. Verse 15, instead of what you are saying, James says, instead of what you're saying in verse 13, that I'm going to just continue to do what I want, when I want, I've got it all planned out. Instead of saying that, instead of saying today or tomorrow, I'll go do this or I'll go do that, you should rather be showing your absolute dependence upon God there in verse 15. You ought to say, if the Lord will, we shall live and we shall do this or we shall do that. Paul had a dependence upon God, and he understood that Paul operated on God's timeline. Let's look at Acts chapter 21. Excuse me, Acts 18. Acts 18, verse 21. And then we'll flip over to Romans 1 and 10, just a couple examples from Paul. Acts chapter 18 and verse 21 says, but bade them farewell, saying, I must by all means keep this feast that cometh in Jerusalem, but I will return again unto you, if God will. And that's the point. And he sailed from Ephesus. If God wills, I'll come back to you. Romans chapter 1 in verse 10. Similar idea. Making request, Romans chapter 1 and verse 10, making request, if by any means, now at length, I might have a prosperous journey, by the will of God, come unto you. So it's not just that Paul's making plans or has a future hope of coming back. It's if it's God will. I like to think, personally, I like to think that I'm dependent upon God, but I'm like most folks, I think. I make plans and goals for the future, and I share those with others, but perhaps the words when I'm sharing these things, if God wills, should also come from my mouth personally when I'm speaking about things to do in the future and times to come. If God wills, this will happen. That'll do two things. That'll bring up God in the conversation between me and somebody else, and it'll help remind me that I am dependent upon God. I didn't really...
His language reminds me of Jesus. I think it's in Matthew 24. He makes a reference back to the days of Noah. When the last thing they expected was for the not to live in the dead. I think he uses that as a reminder too that, I don't know, our society has completely embraced this false idea of new thing periods. The idea that all things are going to remain as they have in the past. Or that there's really been no supernatural events that would disrupt the divine nature. That's just an utterly false notion. I think in our lifetimes, COVID-19 probably was the closest to an alteration of our society and culture. 9/11 certainly was, but the Noah was disruptive.
Yeah.
And Jesus, I think, is reminding everyone that in that day there would be, there was going to be the man, and then started raining, and there was no tomorrow.
Think about a new college grad. They go to a job interview. What's the typical question they'll ask? Where do you see yourself 10 years away? And you contrast that with some of the preachers, places that we support, or preachers in the country.
Yeah.
You ask that question, what kind of look did you get from where do you see it? I'm just thankful for daily bread. So maybe there's an arrogance that we all kind of have over here that things are just going to be like they are for a long, long time, and fail to be grateful for the moment that we have.
Absolutely. Yeah. I don't know how do you overcome that 100%?
So you just make sure you tack on Lord willing before and after you say it. That gets you out there.
That means the interviewer's
That's-
going to say, well, Lord willing, I'll be doing this for you and this for that.
Yeah.
I think Brad nailed the head with the arrogance of it all. It's not arrogant to make plans. It's not arrogant to be prepared for the future. But it's incredibly arrogant if we think that any of those things will come to fruition by my own strength and
Yeah.
might. And I'm going to make this breath of smoke that offers no real substance to anything. So when we see that there in verse 15, I think he started this thought really back in verse 10. Humble yourselves in the presence of the Lord and he will exalt you. And everything he said since then is still building off of that same thing. The way that pride infects our thinking. It's evident in our speech, it's evident in our preparation and planning. And even in the next verse, it's evident in
Yeah.
the way
whatever God wills, whatever God grants me to do, to have that to be, I want to pick that.
Yeah.
And I want to follow his will and his plan for my life. And if the birds of from the path that, I thought we were going down, I'm going to be okay with that. I'm not going to fight against it. I'm not going to lose my faith in him because my faith in me is strong.
Like Joseph, I wonder if he has something in his 5, 10-year, 15-year plan.
Hmm.
And what did he do? He knew right there. So,
There's a t-shirt and meme that came about during COVID that said, "Relax, everything's out of control." And it's meant to be funny, but it was kind of a film. Just relax, we don't have control of anything, we can make our plans, but remember, this is not how it was intended, but when thinking about it, like, we can remember the Lord's in control. And like Jonathan said, we can make our plans and may think we know what's gonna happen, but really, God's in control, and so it's really a liberating thing to know that I don't have to figure it all out myself.
Yeah.
I look back, I mean, if it weren't for God, I couldn't have planned my life to be where it is today. And so I think as you get older, you look back on your life and other people's lives and see, like, if it weren't for the Lord, I wouldn't be here. And so I tried my way and that didn't work. And so I'm just gonna be more dependent, be more, give up some control.
100%. I mean, that seems to be one of the main themes. I said we say that a bunch, but there's several really big, meaty themes in James, and that's one of them. Less of self and more of thee. I mean, get rid of all the selfish, carnal thoughts. Focus on godly wisdom. Pray for godly wisdom. Focus on God. Humility, submission. I mean, that's what you're saying. I mean, you're not in control, and the sooner we realize that, the sooner these folks realize that, the better it will be. The better it will be, and for everybody around them.
But he did it because of God, with God in mind, because of God's people in mind. So, but certainly not an either or. Either don't plan one day past tomorrow, or plan for the future. That's a false choice. Have that view of the future with the right mindset and
Yeah.
understanding.
Absolutely. I mean, just using this congregation here. I mean, how far out are gospel meetings planned with speakers or Bible classes and things like that? I mean, they're planned.
2029.
Yeah. So that's not selfish. That's not selfishness. I mean, what's the purpose of that? That's to get whom we assume will be godly speakers to influence souls.
Paul's a great example of that. When Paul was, in all his letters, he always gave instructions and bring these books and go here and do this. And,
Yeah.
I hope I can go here and do this and preach to these people and visit these people and do all these things.
Yeah.
A lot of his plans didn't work out,
Yeah.
but whatever God will, he didn't do it.
Yeah. Good. Good.
And just think about how empty your life becomes when you say, tomorrow I'm going to do this, I'm going to do that. And it happens. And you think, look what I accomplished, look what my strength brought about, look what my planning brought about. And so you just continue on through life with that. It's empty, it's vain. It's just coincidence that everything worked in your favor to make these things happen. And in the moment that it does fail, you have nothing. You have nothing to
Yep.
stand on, no ground to pick yourself up. So the whole thing in verse 13 really does reflect verse 14, your life is but a vision. There's absolutely nothing of substance in that sort of thinking, apart from recognizing God in the midst of the plan.
And then that's then you put God, but when it fails, we have somebody, we have
Yeah.
God to come in.
You know, I think we read about that earlier, didn't we?
Yeah, read that in my book. I heard someone say recently, somebody that has great personal selfish ambition, the only positive thing to say about it was they were equally unhappy whether they achieved it or not. And I think that's probably true to your point. If you get it, it's not fulfilling, and if you don't get it, you're very unhappy. Either way, it's quite the same.
Yeah. I come across something that was written at the office today. I took a picture of it. To me, it reminded me of this lesson. Worrying does not take away tomorrow's troubles. It takes away today's peace. So, that just, if we're so busy focusing on tomorrow, chasing tomorrow's dreams, we're going to miss opportunities today. Anyway.
I'm not going to mention it immediately, but I can certainly confess it, so I'm going to chime in. The quote written is the control of the illusion. It's actually really, really interesting because in this movie, the main character is offered to the two killers and
Matrix.
yeah. So, but it's a very interesting paradox because if you have the ability to see through the illusion, you can actually see reality. And because most people are living in an illusion. But if you do the right thing, you see what the reality is. When I think about this, I think it's really about seeing the spiritual eyes with the physical eyes. It reminds me of Peter when he stepped out off the boat. He walked on water. What did it take for him to walk on water? I think it took for him to completely, for that brief moment, see through spiritual eyes, which is so hard. I don't know if any of us in our lives will ever, for that brief moment, see that clearly through spiritual eyes to be able to walk on water. But I think that that's ultimately, when we see through physical eyes, we think we're in control, and we think that everything is all in our hands. Sorry to bring up a point.
The Israelites, when they take Jericho, they have the exact same notion. Look what we did. Let's go to the next town. Let's do it again. And when it doesn't fail, you see that it's just like and when it does fail, it just deflates everything. But it's the very same notion. Even though we look back and kind of see that there was an underlying problem going on with the sin of Achan, but still, God didn't say go attack the next town. God said attack Jericho. And once we've seen that, hey, I think they have very good motives. Let's just go to the next one. Let's keep this up. Let's keep this going.
Having preteens and teenagers brings us to light that Izzy's always making big plans with her friends. They're always making big plans together, and they don't ask parents. Parents go,
Right.
you haven't talked to
They don't have a job and don't have a vehicle. What are you making plans for? Right.
You can't drive. You have not thought this through. And I think of the Lord up there watching us make all our plans.
Right.
Thinking, you can't see what I see. And it's presumptuous of you to
Yeah.
make your plans without asking. And to Kyle talking about, I think there's a verse when it's talking about Ai that says Joshua did not ask the Lord. He didn't seek the Lord. So if we're planning and seeking the Lord's guidance, but if we're planning and being presumptuous and, we're seeing it with physical eyes, we can't see the whole picture, and we don't know what's best for us.
Right, and I think that's exactly what we're saying. What James is saying in verse 16. He continues. This is what you should have said was in verse 15. Should be relying on God, but now, verse 16. But now says you rejoice in your own boastings, and such rejoicing is evil. Or how different is the case with you? You're not doing this. You're doing this. You're actually glory and delight in your own self-confidence and presumption. You're boasting. One note I come across is you're boasting in arrogant presumptions, in these vain, confident ideas that the future is certain to you. presuming and confident in ideas that the future is certain to you. He says this kind of thought process of rejoicing is evil. It's not wrong. It's evil. That's strong language. Paul shares a really similar idea in 1 Corinthians chapter 5. 1 Corinthians 5. If someone would read verse 6 and 7. 1 Corinthians 5, 6 and 7.
Your glorying is not good. Do you not know that what 11 leavens the whole lump? Therefore, purge out the old leaven, and there may be a new lump, which is truly are unleavened. For indeed Christ, our Passover, was sacrificed for.
So what's the point Paul's making in that? What's the point? As compared to what James is saying here. To me, it's the same that James has stressed regarding one's actions. What we say, what we do, it has to align with what we claim to be, or else, we set an example that's going to do lots and lots of damage to everybody who sees it. If what we say and what we do, if they don't align with what we claim to be, then we're hypocrites, and we read over and over and over the damage that can do. Even James goes through it. How damaging our tongues can be, our actions can be. If we say something and we don't follow up, if we don't have actions that match what we say, we're hypocrites, and how damaging it is.
Purging, in both of these, James, of course, as we look at verse 8, that purifying factor as well. Purify your hearts, and then we can compare that to cleanse out those old leaven. You're purging out these things in order to be pure and start clean.
You made a point about that earlier, I think, in the quarter. You remember what it was? I can't remember. It was good, but maybe it wasn't that good. I can't remember it. I don't know.
That's how it usually goes.
But no, it was a matter of you purge it, you get rid of all of it, right? You don't just hang on to a little bit of it. If to Paul's point here, if we leave just a little bit of leaven in a lump, what's going to happen? With some time, it's going to grow, right? It's going to infect the whole thing.
This really resonates with me more after having a wife with celiac disease. I mean, you can kind of understand when something gets in the food, even the littlest bit, contaminates the whole.
Yeah.
You can't have it.
Yeah.
There's no scooping up that piece of gluten.
Yeah.
It's throw it away, cook it fresh. That's kind of what we see here. Throw all that away, it's contaminated.
Yeah.
So let's get the good stuff out.
Right. I get that too. We have food allergies in the house, and if there's certain things that you really like, those old ways that you used to really like, you can't do those anymore because it can affect the whole group now. So I get it. Anything else?
Kind of a very simple point here, but the boast that he's referring to in verse 16, like this arrogant boast, is saying, I think I'm going to go to Bowling Green and do some county work for a year, and then I'll come back. That is the unchristian, arrogant boast. It's kind of the most normal thing in the world. I mean, it would be completely unremarkable for anybody to say something like that. And that's the boast. Anyway, that's a very simple point, but that's pretty obvious.
Yeah.
Moses managed to convince himself that him hanging from a rock was what made water come out of it. No acknowledgement of, that's not normal. That's not, there might be something else involved there. Even though he's in his perfect way. He allowed himself to arrogantly say, you want us to bring this water out of this rock?
Yeah.
We'll do it.
And look at the benefits from that, though. What were the benefits? They were given drink, but it cost him. So, yeah, cost him a lot. Yeah, cost him a lot. Yes, sir.
not necessarily what we're talking about a minute ago, that is the Lord will. You know, we need to be very careful that we don't just make that a habitual cliche. I was thinking about what John said made me think of it. Peter, Jesus came walking in the water. Peter said, Lord, if thou wilt, bid me come out to you. And Jesus said, okay, come on.
Yeah.
Now what's going to do? You better think. Oh, you know, and as Michael said, our intentions are we're going to do it. Oh yeah, I got to say what Nancy prayed, the Lord will. But in our mind, we're going to do this. And it could be that when we say, well, if the Lord will, we'll do it. We'll let go, okay, it's going to happen. And we need to, you know, not take it lightly. It's not just like saying a prayer over a food cut off. Things can become a
Right.
rote practice.
Yeah.
Maybe just envision Peter saying, Lord, if thou wilt, would you come to me?
Yeah.
Now what Peter did, we know what happened. Peter stepped out. Peter. So whatever you're going to do, if the Lord says yes, are we willing to do what we do? And if the Lord wills, I will keep this commitment.
Yeah.
Will soldier Paul.
Yeah. Generally, no. I mean, that's the reality of it. Generally, no. I mean,
Kind of like becoming a teacher.
yeah.
Not many be.
Yes. Yes.
That's kind of a twist on what
Yeah.
James is saying, but there's a lot of ways that James is talking about. Guard your tongue. Be careful with your words.
Yeah.
Your oaths and so on.
Right. Verse 17, what's the therefore? I love that. I'm probably not going to forget that. Yeah, probably has reference to the point that was mentioned 13 through 16, right? Of the believer recklessly forming plans for the future without seeking God's approval first because of the uncertainty of even being alive tomorrow. We have no control over that. It could also be referring to James' teachings in the previous chapters too. Therefore, it's the summation of things. Or just the overall principle of the Bible. I don't know necessarily it makes a whole lot of difference, but it's true as he goes on here. Therefore, to him that knoweth to do good and doeth it not, unto him it is sin. The failure to do anything that one knows to be good and true and from above, and to not do it, it's sin. And that's missing the mark concerning what God has said. And that's 1 John chapter 3 and verse 4. Whosoever committeth sin transgresseth also the law, for sin is a transgression of the law. The sin of omission can also be the result of just putting things off, slothfulness, or deferring those things when knows to be good. I don't know. Perhaps it could be that the greatest danger of threatening a Christian spiritual welfare is not the sins of one of the sin of commission, like stealing or drunkenness or adultery. Maybe this, just not doing the sin of omission to the point that one's spiritual life is just devoid of good works. And James speaks over and over of actions, just devoid of good works and doing God's righteousness. James reminds that it's sinful to know what one ought to do and then not do it. So I don't know if we're so busy. If we're so busy in our lives doing and planning what we want instead of doing what God would have us do, maybe that should be a warning, as Michael said. Any other thoughts on as we finished up chapter 4?
You can swap it out with the word glory. That might give you a little more sense in verse 16 to say, glory in your arrogance, and such glory is evil. That's, and then I think that in verse 17, the therefore is leaning back on verse 10 and 11.
Okay.
Humble yourselves. That's the danger of all of this pride
Yeah.
that we've seen from each one of these different sections talking about how we're prideful in the way we talk to others, we're prideful in the way we plan, we're prideful in the way that we glory, it's focused on ourselves.
Yeah.
It elevates us to a position reserved for God. We're worshiping ourselves. We're trying to show the world, this is why I'm worthy. I made these plans because I can get it done. I can treat you this way because of who I am. And that sort of glory is
Good. Thank you. We'll pick up chapter 5 on Sunday.